Hello and welcome to Election Exchange. Over the past few weeks, we have seen volatility in the Indian markets due to the doubts over the election outcome. Prime Minister Modi and Home Minister Amit Shah have said that such kind of volatility is not unprecedented before elections. And post the 4th of June, markets will rally to historic highs. What is the Congress's view on this? Joining us right now is Jairam Ramesh, General Secretary of the Congress Party. Mr. Ramesh, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
You felt the need to clarify on these reports on market volatility because, yes, businesses, investors, markets have their doubts as to what will happen post the 4th of June. Why did you put out that clarification?
I was not responding to the volatility. I was responding to the incitement by the Home Minister, no less a person than the Home Minister, and the Prime Minister himself, of course, on speculating on the causes of the volatility and attributing it to the inevitability of the India alliance getting its majority. So I was responding to that. I was responding to the fact that the Home Minister was deliberately trying to key up markets, and whereas what I was putting forward is the reality. The reality is that private investment is at an all-time low as a proportion of GDP in the last 10 years. The atmosphere of fear and distrust has never prevailed like this as it has prevailed in the last 10 years. The uncertainty in the tax regime, the frequent changes in the GST regime, the income tax regime, these are all sort of trends that we have seen during the Modi regime, whether it's demonetization or whether it's the uncertainty and unpredictability of economic policy. So I was responding to that. And what I was saying is that the India group, the India alliance, the group, of parties, political parties, are committed to a predictable tax environment in which removal of this fear and distrust is of primary importance. A GST 2.0 is of importance, and the removal and elimination of angel tax and other exploitative tax initiatives is of importance. So that's what I was reacting to.
But Mr. Ramesh, why should businesses believe this pitch? Because when you speak about taxation, it was the retrospective taxation during the UPA era that investors still talk about. In companies like I.N.D.I.A, Vodafone, they had faced the brunt of it. It became a legal hassle globally as well.
And Ken, which was carried forward, the same Mr. Arun Jaitley, who called Vodafone tax terrorism, indulged in that tax terrorism when it came to K&N. So please, let's have the full history of this.
So former Union Minister Veerappa Moily also said that this was something that has hurt the Congress Party and the UPA. So how would you assure investors and businesses that those kind of decisions will not be taken?
The best assurance is the performance. I remember on the 13th of May 2004, the results came out. On the 17th of May 2004, which was a Monday, markets fell very significantly. Dr. Manmohan Singh's name was announced as Prime Minister the next day, and markets resumed, coming back to their normal position after a few weeks. And then what happened? For the next 10 years, you had an average growth rate of GDP of 6.8%. You had a private investment rate which was going at about 32-33% of GDP. So that's the reality. The reality was the performance. If you take the GDP growth rate, if you look at the private investment as a proportion of GDP, the 10 years of 2004-2014 was vastly superior to this much hyped period of 2014 and 2024. I'm just now talking about this sector of the economy. I'm not even getting into issues of wages. I'm not getting into unemployment and other issues. I'm just talking of the headline numbers, the GDP growth numbers, significantly higher, 6.8% during the Dr. Manmohan Singh decade versus 5.8% during the Modi decade, and private investment. And a record number of private entrepreneurs taking citizenship of Singapore, Dubai, London, US. Why are they fleeing? They're making the profits here and they're fleeing.
I would also like to ask you about the social welfare schemes and the push by the UPA, by the opposition alliance, if they are elected post the 4th of June. Now, you have junked the idea of inheritance tax that Sam Pitroda had spoken about.
junk an idea if the idea existed in the first place.
Yeah.
The idea didn't exist. The idea existed as a propaganda tool in the mind of my Prime Minister. There was no mention of the word inheritance tax. He used the word virasat kar. There's no virasat kar either in the Hindi Nyaya Patra or inheritance tax in the English Nyaya
Right.
Patra.
You
In
also
fact,
said-
Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, who abolished estate duty on the 16th of March
You said that
1985.
it's not there in the manifesto.
It's absolutely not there.
You also said that the Prime Minister's pitch that wealth will be taken and redistributed among minorities finds no mention in the manifesto.
Absolutely. This is all the Prime Minister, figments of the Prime Minister's fertile imagination. A Prime Minister who even by mistake cannot speak the truth.
But what about things like corporate tax? Now, this government had reduced corporate tax on existing companies and startups. What's your view on that?
In spite of the very significant drop in corporate tax rates, which took place incidentally a few days before the Howdy Modi event in Houston. Clearly, there was an international audience that the outgoing Prime Minister was playing to. The corporate tax rates were reduced, but private investment has not boomed. There's no buoyancy in private investment. It's still stagnating at about 27 or 28% of GDP. And why are businessmen now going and seeking citizenship of Dubai and Singapore and other countries of the world?
But will you review this decision?
Country,
But will you review the decision of corporate tax rate and think about hiking it?
There's no question. I mean, see, we have to have a predictable tax regime. One of the reasons why, Keynes once said that investment is not just a financial decision. Investment is a psychological decision. And today the psychology in India is one of fear, is one of distrust, is one of suspicion. The extraordinary draconian powers that have been given to organizations like the ED, the CBI, the income tax, the small trader, the small businessman, the medium-sized trader, the medium-sized businessman, even big business. I mean, people are afraid to speak. And if they're afraid to speak, they are afraid to invest. So while the tax rates are one element of the equation, the bigger element of the equation is the distrust and the fear that's been created by the Prime Minister and his policies. So note, his extraordinary statement that the Prime Minister made a few days ago that, Adani and Ambani are going in a tempo with gunny bags of black money and giving it to the Congress party. I thought black money had been unearthed and eradicated after the demonetization exercise of November 8th, 2016. And Prime Minister is speaking of black money in the hands of two of the biggest industrialists of India. Okay. Extraordinary situation.
So no plans to hike corporate tax rate. You feel that...
No, listen, these are matters for the government to decide, who the finance minister, who the prime minister. All I can tell you is what we are committed to publicly in our manifesto is a predictable tax environment, a tax environment which removes the draconian powers that have been given to the hands of the income tax officials over the last 10 years, a tax environment which looks at a good and simple tax, as far as GST is concerned, and removal of the exploitative tax schemes. Look at the corporate bond scheme, for example. I mean, the BJP collected almost 8,200 crores from the corporate tax from the electoral bond scheme. And part of the electoral bond scheme was the use, Hafta Vasuli, was the use of the ED and the CBI and the income tax against companies. They were being investigated by the ED and the CBI and the income tax. They bought electoral bonds and the investigation stopped. And this is extraordinary.
So when you speak about ending tax terrorism, how will you change the working of organizations like ED, IT department and CBI?
Incidentally, this is tax terrorism. The tax terrorism that the Modi government has indulged in is unprecedented in India's economic and financial history. Unprecedented. And the reason why this happened is because amendments have been pushed through, bulldozed through, in laws, in income tax laws, in the PMLA, the Prevention of Money Laundering Act, without any scrutiny, without any debate, without any, give and take with political parties in Parliament. Absolutely draconian way in which these amendments were introduced. And we are committed to removing all those laws. We have said, not only anti-farmer laws, not only anti-labor laws, not only laws that were weakened to protect the environment and forest cover, but also laws that militate against greater investment, like exploitative tax schemes, like the angel tax. We have said so clearly in our manifesto that we will not just review them, but we will eliminate them.
Okay. Now, in terms of you're speaking about angel tax in the context of startups. Now, as far as the startup ecosystem is concerned, India is today the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. The number of startups in the last 10 years has now increased to 1 lakh.
We must
How will you encourage
we
that?
must accelerate the entire startup and deepen the startup ecosystem. We are committed as part of our I.N.D.I.A guarantees that we have announced repeatedly, that we will have a startup fund which will actually fund startups directly across the country in various trades, in various businesses, in various industries. It's 5,000 crores to begin with. It could well go to 10,000 crores over a period of time. So we are committed to the whole idea of startup. The startups were not invented in 2014, by the way. You know, this has a long evolutionary history. So there's been continuity, and where there continuity is demanded, we will continue with the continuity. It's only where there are sharp breaks, like the tax terrorism, that you have talked about, and I have also mentioned, like this whole business about creating an environment which is simply not conducive to private investment. I think the manifesto clearly recognizes, our manifesto, and Mr. Chidambaram and others have said this repeatedly, the 3 Ws. You know, when you talk about 3 Ws, you always think of the 3 Ws of West Indian cricket. Everton Weekes, Clyde Walcott and Frank Worrell. These are the 3 Ws. But in today's world, you know, West Indies is no longer a cricket power. So when we say 3 Ws, it means work, it means wealth, it means welfare. And we have made abundantly clear that our policies on welfare are dependent on our ability to expand the creation of wealth and give wealth creators an environment in which they create the wealth and create the wealth in a legal manner. You can't create wealth through cronyism.
All right. Now, speaking about some of the schemes related to manufacturing, you're speaking about making a conducive environment for investments to flow in. So what about PLI schemes? Is that something that you feel needs to be reviewed? Any other schemes related to manufacturing?
We talked about JLI, job-linked incentives. Ultimately, we have to create jobs. You know, it's not just adequate to get the GDP growth. You have to create the jobs. It has to be employment. You're already bringing 8-9 million people into the labor force year after year. You have a backlog, the record unemployment rate in the last 45 years as far as youth unemployment is concerned. So, yes, manufacturing, this was recognized years ago that we cannot go from being an agricultural economy to a service-oriented economy without going through the intervening phase of being a manufacturing powerhouse. So we have to have a manufacturing base. In the last 10 years, the share of manufacturing in GDP has actually fallen. Just as the rhetoric has expanded, the share of manufacturing has fallen by something like 2 percentage points over the last 10 years. So that has to be reversed.
So you feel that the PLI schemes have a right direction?
Modern manufacturing, traditional manufacturing, there are traditional sectors, textiles, leather. There are also sectors where we have a huge competitive advantage, like pharmaceuticals, engineering, electronics, IT, IT hardware. We are recognized for our supremacy in IT software, but it's IT hardware that is going to drive the next generation of the IT revolution in our country. So there can be no two opinions. And the new manufacturing policy was announced, I remember, when Dr. Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister in 2010. And why are we behaving as if we are suddenly discovering the value of manufacturing? It goes back to the 50s. What is HAL? What is BHEL? What is HMT? What is Steel Authority of India? These are all manufacturing powerhouses. So, India has always had this policy that we must be a manufacturing center. Now, for a variety of reasons I don't have time to get into, we became a powerhouse in the services industry. And we didn't become the type of manufacturing powerhouse like the Chinese became. We became the back office of the world. We didn't become a factory of the world. We still can do it. But the nature of the factory is changing. The traditional manufacturing, traditional services is gone. It's now manual services. So there's manufacturing integrated into services. So these are all new opportunities that are opening up.
Right. But there should be jobs-linked incentives.
There has to be jobs. jobs, jobs and jobs.
Okay.
These are the three priorities.
So
if you
PLI
ask
is
me.
fine, but
We have to look at jobs.
focus
We
on
have to look
jobs.
at jobs. We have to look at jobs. Jobs, jobs and jobs.
Right. Now, speaking about GST, you
Not
spoke...
just Steve Jobs.
Okay. In your manifesto, you've spoken about GST 2.0, a single rate, moderate tax rate with certain exceptions. Now,
And without having to issue 2,000, 3,000 amendments from time to time.
Right.
And having a time-bound, credible, impartial dispute settlement mechanism. Disputes are inevitable in a system like ours. But those have to be resolved quickly. And we have to move on. It's a good and simple tax. It's a good, GST is good and simple tax. It has to be good. It has to be simple.
so when you're speaking about a single rate, right now the highest rate is about 28%.
We're talking of compressing the number of rates.
Okay. How many should
We're
there be?
recognizing we have to recognize you can't have a single rate like we have in other countries, in many other countries of the world. You will have one or two exceptions, one or two stated exceptions from the beginning. But by and large, we have to reduce the number of rates, maybe one or max. You're going to have one rate, and then you must have one rate for what are considered to be goods that are consumed by the better off sections of society, and one rate which is lower than the revenue neutral rate for mass consumption goods. So we're talking of considerable simplification. And the fact that we introduced the GST, I don't think the Congress party was ever, in fact, the first reference to a GST was in the budget speech of 2005 of Mr. Chidambaram when he was the finance minister. And ever since then, there's been a forward movement on the GST. In fact, when the GST bill was prepared in 2011, when Mr. Pranab Mukherjee was the finance minister, it went to the Standing Committee on Finance, which was chaired by a BJP member, and they didn't submit their report for almost 2 years and 3 months, by which time it became too late to implement the GST. Otherwise, the GST would have been implemented in 2013.
Right. Now you've given us a sense as to what those two rates should be. One should be for premium,
but these are
any percentages?
I don't think in an interview like this, I neither have the authority nor I'm in a position to tell you definitively what is going to be done. But I can tell you what we have stated in our manifesto. I can tell you what our thinking is as reflected in our manifesto, and that is GST 2.0. Not tinkering on the margin, but fundamental changes in the way the GST is structured, the way GST is implemented. It has to be simpler. It has to be less cumbersome, particularly for the MSME sectors, which are feeling the brunt of not just demonetization and also cheap imports from China, but also a poorly designed GST. Right. So it has to be less cumbersome.
All right, hold that thought, Mr. Ramesh. We have to take a short break, but don't go anywhere. This conversation with Jairam Ramesh, General Secretary of the Congress Party, continues on the other side. Welcome back. You're watching Election Exchange. With us right now is a special guest, Jairam Ramesh, General Secretary of the Congress Party, and we're in conversation with him about Election 2024. Mr. Ramesh, thank you for joining us. Now, speaking about disinvestment, now this government in 2021 brought in a disinvestment policy.
No, it brought in privatization policy.
Privatization.
It brought in the disinvestment came in 1991.
Right.
What Mr. Modi did was to bring in privatization. He sold off airports. Ports are being sold off. Steel plants were up for sale. And virtually, in most cases, this privatization is benefiting one or two big industrial groups. That's all.
So are you going to be reviewing this?
We are for competition. We need more competition. We need more genuine competition. We can't have oligopolies and monopolies in our industrial system. I'm afraid what Mr. Modi has accomplished in the last 10 years, and there is the political economy. These are not just because of economic factors, but also because of political factors. You see which one industrial group has benefited from the entire privatization process in airports or in infrastructure or in ports. So there's the politics behind it as well, which we don't need to get into right now. But all I can tell you is that disinvestment as a policy was first articulated in Dr. Manmohan Singh's budget of the 24th of July 1991. What Mr. Modi did was to make it Privatization. And when he faced a backlash, he changed quickly the word privatization and called it monetization. So monetization is nothing but privatization. What else is there? It is privatization. So monetization is going to be as much as a disaster as demonetization was.
But the privatization, the disinvestment policies that have gone, will there be continuity, or will you try and expand the competition basket?
No, competition and more competition. We must reduce barriers to entry. We must reduce barriers to exit while protecting the legitimate interests of all stakeholders, particularly labor. We can't have an insolvency and bankruptcy code, which has haircuts to the extent of 80%, 90%, as we have seen in a large number of cases. We are for competition. There will be a public sector in strategic sectors of the economy, certain strategic sectors of the economy. Public sector will be there. But we know that we cannot accelerate GDP growth. We cannot transit to an 8%, 9% rate of economic growth without strong, buoyant, expanding private investment. Okay. And that's what the real priority is.
When it comes to social welfare schemes, the manifesto, you said 1 lakh rupees to the poorest family in the country, and this will go to the woman member of the family. 1 lakh.
It's a basic income, It's a basic income.
And 1 lakh per year under right to apprenticeship for the youth.
1 lakh for the first year.
1 lakh
not
for
per
the
year.
1 lakh
it's for the first year. Only 1 year.
Only for 1 year.
Apprenticeship. So that you search the job market, you get the skills to make yourself. Many of the people who are unemployed today don't have the skills which the labor market is demanding. Right. So the whole idea of this Right to Apprenticeship Act, which we will pass, is to make a diploma holder, a diploma graduate, or a degree holder eligible with the skills that the labor market is demanding, and that 1 year apprenticeship for which he gets a compensation, or she gets a compensation of 1 lakh.
Right. But one question that everyone is asking as to where will the funds for these social welfare schemes, these I.N.D.I.A schemes that you've spoken about, and where will these jobs come from? Yeah. How will this job creation take place?
The same question was asked
because the government's ability to create jobs.
The same question was asked of me when the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act came into being. It was answered. And till today, the Act is under implementation, and the Prime Minister is taking credit for it, an act which he actively opposed. The same question was asked in 2011, 2012 and 2013 on the National Food Security Act. Today, the National Food Security Act has been renamed Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, Prime Minister taking credit for it, while he had opposed the National Food Security Act. The economy grows. The economy generates revenues. Tax base increases, expands. Wealth gets generated. Consumption increases. You put money in the hands of people, they spend. They spend on goods and services produced by India, by Indian companies, by Indian enterprises. That's the whole, one of the driving spirits of this 1 lakh which is going to be deposited every year into the account of a woman in a poor family. That is to drive consumption. So, and consumption itself will then drive, if you look at all the engines of growth, GDP growth, investment lukewarm, consumption lukewarm, trade lukewarm. That's what we are trying to get out of. Okay. So these questions have been asked before. Where are you going to get the money from? Where the resources are going to come from? The world's so-called fastest growing economy. We are a fast growing economy, third largest economy. We're going to be a third largest economy, whoever the Prime Minister. That's an arithmetical inevitability. Reaching a $5 trillion economy is an arithmetical no-brainer. It does not require anybody to tell us that we will be a $5 trillion economy. These will generate the resources required for the welfare aspect and the work aspect of what I have said, the 3 Ws: work, welfare, and wealth.
Right. This is also a battle for survival, in a sense, for the Congress party and the opposition. You are very confident that come 4th of June, the opposition will get a majority.
After the 2 phases,
yes,
it was very clear to me, and I had said after the 2 phases, 19th of April and 27th of April, Dakshin mein BJP saaf, और उत्तर भारत में, पश्चिम भारत में और पूर्वी भारत में बीजेपी half. That is one confidence level, the confidence that we gained from feedback, not only from our workers, from our allies, from non-political actors who are active in political activities. The second reason for our confidence, which has, sort of only increased in the last few days, is the nature of the Prime Minister's campaign. The Prime Minister's campaign has become completely communal. It's become sharply polarizing and divisive. And he has been spreading a pandemic of lies after the 19th, because he has realized that there is no leher for him. People are sick and tired of a jaded and faded Prime Minister. So he's quickly changed his campaign style, his campaign rhetoric. And that's what leads me to the conclusion, and led many of us to the conclusion, that what we are seeing is nervousness on the part of the Prime Minister. And that's what gives us the confidence that we are going to get a clear and decisive majority. The people of India are speaking silently, but they are speaking through the ballot box. In spite of what the Prime Minister, the Home Minister might try to incite the markets, psephologists may appear on television, self-styled psephologists may appear on television and give decisive mandates to the BJP. But the fact is, on the ground, in state after state, particularly in states where the Congress party was decimated in 2019, you ask me, where do I get the confidence from? Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Karnataka, Telangana, Chhattisgarh. These are states in 2019, we were down to 0 or 1 at most. And you will see in 2019, in 2024, the performance that we had in 2019 is not going to be repeated. And that's what gives me the confidence that we will have a clear and decisive majority.
All right, Mr. Ramesh, thank you so much for speaking to us about the Congress's manifesto and the Congress's message to businesses and investors about continuing a stable policy regime with no knee-jerk reactions. That's the message going from you. Let's see what happens on the 4th of June now.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.